welcome. Hopefully you loved my dancing if you caught it. I always love the music that gets played before these webinars. I'm Cassie DeWalt. My pronouns are she, her. I am a proud board member of OutCare Health. Wanted to thank you all for joining this OutTalk series, the panelists and everyone else joining. As you know, we're devoted to discussing diversity and intersectionality within LGBTQ plus communities. We have many people across the world tuning in. I saw people were posting where they're from. I'm calling in from St. Louis, Missouri, so please let me know if you're nearby. But we want this to be a safe, welcoming space for everyone. So assume positive intent always, feel comfortable asking any questions. All of these are recorded and they can be watched on our website or YouTube. So excited for this out talk on love is family. What is it? Love makes a family. So really looking forward to this discussion. We'll hear from inspiring people doing amazing work. And I'm so thankful for our moderator. I can't say it, moderator John. I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie, and thanks for joining us today. It's lovely to see you as always.
You too.
So welcome, everyone. As Cassie was saying, this is going to be a really beautiful conversation about the journey to parenthood for us in the LGBTQ community. It's not as straightforward as it might be for our cis hetero communities. And so it's a beautiful thing for us to be having a conversation today about, especially with this amazing group of panelists. And knowing how amazing they are, what I'm going to do is invite them to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about who they are and what they do. And they're getting a surprise bonus question right now here live on the webinar. And in these times where things are a little bit topsy-turvy, what is your go-to form of self-care? That's today's bonus question. So with that kind of in play, let's start the introductions. And Rebecca, who also likes to go by Becca, so I may be slipping into that today. If you're okay, let's start with you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Becca Nyack. My pronouns are she, her. I am an attorney at the law firm of Hangley, Aaronchuk, Siegel, Pentland, and Schiller. I live and work in Philadelphia and do adoption and assisted reproduction law. My focus throughout my whole career has been on LGBTQ plus families, running the gamut. Before I did more family formation law, I did situations where people, more sort of on the breakup side, but before people really had all the rights they needed. So like marriage, divorces prior to marriage equality, things like that. So that's who I am professionally. Personally, I'm a queer parent. I have a blended household with 3 children. My son is donor conceived, and my wife, to have her kids who are twins, did intentional co-parenting. So we have with a male couple. So we have a pretty unique family with lots of love and parents.
Well, Becca, I think the bonus question applies more than ever with 3 kids in the
Oh
house.
yeah.
What's
So
your
the bonus
favorite form of
question, I almost
self-care?
forgot. So my go-to is running. I love to sort of get out there in the morning when everything is quiet before like the day gets really busy and go for a run.
Lovely. Thank you. Samara, would you like to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Dr. Samara Thomas. I am a reproductive endocrinologist and infertility specialist at Beverly Hills Fertility in Los Angeles, California. And as a physician, what I do is help people conceive. And so I do IVF, egg freezing, third-party ART, which involves surrogacy, sperm donors, egg donors. I also help run our program for fertility preservation prior to hormone therapy for trans individuals. So I have a lot of experience in helping people in the LGBTQ plus community build their families. Something I do for self-care, I have 2 lovely dogs, a Chihuahua mix and a little golden doodle. And so I love to cuddle up with them and kind of go on walks and just spend quality time. So that's my typical self-care.
Yay, I love it. And Janine, hi. Oh,
Hi. Oh, sorry. I'm just having all sorts of technical difficulties today.
Okay.
So I'm Janine Stiles. I'm a certified professional midwife, and Oh, sorry. And can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Just after you've introduced yourself, maybe see if you can get your camera back on again.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what is going on with my camera. Um, okay. Um, Yeah, I'm Janine Stiles. I'm a certified professional midwife in Minnesota, and I have a small midwifery practice that's half prenatal and pregnancy care and half fertility-based care, mostly for LGBTQ folks and single parents that just need a little extra assistance. And I help lots of families, with fertility consultations and kind of managing this process. Also, a handful of years ago, I started a small nonprofit community group called the Queer Birth Project, and we're a group of birth and postpartum professionals that do kind of two things. One, we do a lot of professional training, so we train a lot of our colleagues to provide better LGBTQ competent care during the perinatal or childbearing period. And then our other half is around community organizing for LGBTQ families. So we do a lot of educational sessions, peer-to-peer kind of counseling things. We have a new parent group, and we're like talking about birth choices for LGBTQ families, things like that. So that's me professionally. I help lots of local families here at least begin the process of family building. And then personally, I been married to my wife. We're about to have our 25-year anniversary. We have just recently become empty nesters. Our donor conceived kiddo is actually in Philly. So shout out to Becca and Philly there. He's at Temple University in his junior year. So we're figuring out how to be a couple in as empty nesters, as many people have done. And I think I didn't mention my pronouns are she, her. And my self-care, yeah, that's a good question. We have some backyard chickens, so I guess some of my self-care is caring for them and just sitting in our backyard and watching them peck around. And my wife last year got me a little chicken cam, so I can even watch them peck around when I'm not at home.
Oh, I love it. Chicken Cam, they're celebrities. So, Janine, just check down in the lower corner and see if your video button may have just gotten toggled off by accident. That might be one way to fix this. So, hey, everybody, my name's John Sovak. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a therapist in Pasadena, California. And I specialize in working with LGBTQIA plus kids and their families during the coming out process. And I'm also an author of a beautiful book for parents called Out, a parent's guide supporting your LGBTQIA plus kid through coming out and beyond. So my forms of self-care, there are myriad, but I'm going to go with the one that always removes my anxiety. And my husband's like, oh, bad day. And it's like, no, I just needed to bake. I'm a baker. Baking makes me so happy. And it's a place where you come together. And if you mix things together and put them in the oven, beautiful smells fill the house and good food shows up and everybody likes it, something freshly baked. They just do, you know? So that one's good for me. So, I think there's a really beautiful conversation to be having right now. And really looking at like what are some of the really unique challenges for the LGBTQIA plus community when they're looking to start a family in the multiple and myriad ways that that can happen. So let's just start there. Like for our listeners, what are some of the barriers or unique challenges that our community members might face in pursuing this process? And Samara, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest challenges is knowing where to start. And so, one of the things that we think about is how do you build your family and what are your needs, your unique needs as an individual or as a couple? What are your biological organs? How does that play into how do you present now? What is your sexual identity and how do you want to build a family and how big of a family? And so whether you're on hormones or not on hormones. So there's just a lot of questions that come into play that hetero individuals may not necessarily ever have to deal with. And so the first step is kind of initiating care with someone you feel comfortable with, either it's a primary care doctor or it's a fertility specialist, and trying to navigate those questions about how do you build a family and what are your family building goals and what tools do I need? What resources do I need? What support network do I need? And what does that look like for me as an individual? Or if you're in a couple, what does that look like for you as a couple? And how do you guys come together to build your family? So I think there's just so many more questions that we have to answer that other individuals don't necessarily have to even think about. And so those are the big challenges that I see a lot of individuals face.
And Janine, Becca, what might you add to that?
Well, as the attorney in the room, I'm going to add on the legal challenges that for cisgender heterosexual peers, they certainly, I have many clients who face infertility challenges, but the legal challenges for LGBTQ plus individuals, I would say across the board, there's more discrimination. So even though the law should apply equally to people using gestational carriers, for people using donors, in practice, LGBTQ people face more discrimination and might be asked more regularly. Okay, well, who's the parent? Or, what, and people need to think about what do they need to do to protect their family legally to make sure that both or all intended parents are also legal parents. And what's needed is going to vary from state to state. Who is a parent is a question of state law. And so each state has their own structure to decide who is a parent and who isn't a parent of a child born through assisted reproduction. Some states have statutes that make it really clear. Other states do not have statutes and have case law to rely on. And the interesting thing is the question of who is a legal parent is answered by the state where the people are living at the time that the question is raised, the state that has jurisdiction. And so we really want to make sure that parent-child relationships are protected, not just in the jurisdiction that the family is living in at the present moment, but that it's portable from state to state, and that, if we have any extra challenges with our federal government, that that relationship is going to be recognized. And I think there's also a big conflation between marriage equality and parental equality, and those two things don't necessarily go hand in hand. That just because you're married and just because your name is on the birth certificate, you could still have parental rights challenged. And so, there are a lot of ways to protect that, parental rights, the biggest of which is doing confirmatory adoption to make sure that if there is someone who is not a legal parent because there's a, use of a donor, that rights are confirmed through adoption.
Mhm.
Yeah, and those are all great things, and I would echo all of what's already been said. But I think, kind of first and foremost, these systems aren't designed for us, right? Healthcare around family building isn't designed for queer couples, right? Adoption agencies mostly work with straight couples, right? So the systems just right off the bat aren't really set up for our couples. So that's probably the biggest challenge right then and there. And then I don't want to repeat too much what other people have said. So the things I would just add right now is like this political climate is just making it really hard for families just to even make these decisions. Like, is this the right time for us to be building our families? And then the second biggest barrier, and I think this is, might come up a little bit later too, is just around cost. All of these costs have skyrocketed. Every time I turn around, people are telling me that the cost of cryopreserved sperm has gone up dramatically, or the cost of a consult with an OB has gone up dramatically. And I'm guessing sort of the same as in the surrogacy and the adoption realm as well. Um, our families are being really, this has always been an expensive process for us, but I'm seeing more and more families being kind of priced out of family building right now.
Mhm. And if I can ask an incredibly naive question of the panelists, what are some of the pathways towards parenthood for our community?
So I can touch on some of that. One of the pathways is something called this is about what type of technology or what type of services we offer to help you build a family. And so one of them is called an insemination cycle or intrauterine insemination. And that's where we use sperm, whether it's donor sperm or one of the intended parent sperm, and place it into someone who has a uterus and ovaries in order to carry that pregnancy. And so that's called an insemination cycle, and it's open to all types of individuals if that's the path for pregnancy for you. And then we have to kind of go through your medical history to kind of determine if that's an appropriate path. Another option is something called IVF, or in vitro fertilization, and that's where we combine eggs and sperm to create embryos. And you have the option to do testing of them to make sure they're healthy, looking for genetic conditions that put a child at risk for certain conditions when they're older. The other option is something called surrogacy. So we can use that embryo and place it into a carrier who will help carry that pregnancy, whether you're a gay couple, a gay male couple, or you just need surrogacy for whatever medical or reason that you need a surrogate. So that's, again, a discussion to have with your doctor. And we do something called reciprocal IVF, which I think is also lovely. And so for some of our same-sex female couples, one partner will go through IVF and create embryos, and we would transfer that embryo for the other partner to carry, and it allows them to share in the process of parenthood, where both of them are able to kind of offer something biologically for the child that they share together. So those are the main types of services that we provide to help you conceive, aside from obviously adoption, which we touched on earlier.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would add on, certainly, and I think we're talking more about assisted reproduction today, but there are certainly family building options to consider in terms of adoption, whether it's private, in the, with an agency or through foster care, as well as, sometimes people will not see a doctor when they're doing at-home insemination, certainly. And then there's also, when we're talking about surrogacy here, where you would have a doctor involved, we're talking about gestational surrogacy, meaning that the person who is carrying the pregnancy, it is not their egg. There is also something called traditional surrogacy or genetic surrogacy, where the person and the egg are who's carrying the pregnancy and the egg come from the same person. Depending, very few states have a statute that is built for that, although we are starting to see it in some states. So when we see traditional surrogacy in many states, that would proceed as a step parent or second parent adoption, where the person who's giving birth would have to relinquish parental rights post-birth. And then the second intended parent, who's not genetically related to the child, would adopt. And then another way to form families, my family was partially formed through intentional co-parenting. That means where people who are not in a relationship with each other come together to have a child, usually using assisted reproduction, oftentimes with a doctor. And I think that can be a really interesting thing. I think when I see those people coming together to have a family, I think the clinic forms are especially important there, because it's not, clinic forms are not built for that scenario. And so if that's something that you're considering or doing, making sure that the person who's giving sperm, if they're not doing that to be a donor, that is very clear. And same in the reverse, the person whose egg is being used, that they're not serving as a gestational carrier. And so those are some other type of ways that people might build a family that I see in my practice.
Janine, anything you would add?
Nope, I think they covered most everything. Yeah, those are the big things. We haven't touched a lot on foster care, and that's we have a lot of foster families here in Minnesota, because Minnesota's been a friendly state for LGBTQ folks, and I know fostering has been kind of tenuous for some LGBTQ families out there, and not even allowed in some states. I happen to live in, one of the biggest counties in Minnesota that's been very pro LGBTQ foster families for a long time. But one thing to note, with fostering, Minnesota especially is a high reunification state. As many as 80% of children are reunified with their biological parents, and so that isn't always the a long-term or permanent way for LGBTQ families to to have children stay in their homes for long term. And there's loss that's associated with that in some way. Same with adoption, there's sometimes loss associated with that for the children. So just sort of a slightly more complicated ways to make your family, but definitely common ways here in Minnesota, all the ways the other two panelists said as well.
Mhm. Yeah. And for those of you who are joining us live, if you have any questions that come up, you can open up in the Q&A, you can write them there, and we will try and bring them into the conversation as we have time and it feels like the right moment. But kind of going along with this idea too, a lot of people joining us today are people like me who are a therapist or a general practitioner or someone who works in a clinic or an agency. How can they become more supportive and or educated in helping their clients start to take this journey?
Mm.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think first and foremost, I think it's just really important to educate yourself and sort of recognize where your gaps in knowledge are. I've definitely helped people that were harmed by care providers that were sort of well-meaning, but they really didn't know what they were talking about, and gave either poor advice or kind of no advice, and then the person still had to pay for that. And so just like really upping your knowledge game. There's lots of organizations, my little nonprofit, Queer Birth Project, that offers trainings, but there's lots of organizations out there. This one in particular offers some great trainings. But like WPATH has some really amazing trainings around trans health and stuff as well. So they're definitely out there. So before doing a lot of serving of LGBTQ folks, especially during their family building time, just like making sure your knowledge is up to snuff, right? That you're thinking about these things, you're thinking about the experience. And then we always encourage you to, really understand who your queer or LGBTQ colleagues are, and maybe they're a better place for you to be referring folks to instead of serving them yourself. Um, so really just like, thinking through, am I prepared to do this? And then thinking through, I think somebody else mentioned like your forms and your materials and, are all the images in your waiting room of straight couples, or, just really not very, supportive of all different types of families. So really thinking through before you just jump in, and most folks, especially if you're doing a seminar like this, like your heart's in the right place, and that's great. But that's only half the process.
And if any of our panelists do have resources they'd like to share with our community, just pop them in the chat and we'll make sure and get that information out as well when this gets loaded up for people to watch in the future.
Yeah, just to echo that, like I think going to conferences, networking with people already in the space, really putting yourself out there, even if it includes shadow work and just kind of sitting in on sessions and really kind of learning from people who have more experience can be a great gateway. I get a lot of messages from therapists and specialists in counseling who want to start reaching out into the fertility world, it really want to make sure it's a safe space for patients. And so you really have to be careful about who you refer to. Is it safe? Do they have experience? Because as a fertility specialist, you don't want to refer someone to get counseling and it's not the right avenue. It's not the right support network. They don't have the right knowledge. And so we really want to make sure that people are doing the hard work to make sure that they are a safe space and they have the right knowledge base. And so a lot of that, I agree with Janine, is really taking accountability, taking those steps to make sure, are you the right person to provide the best care? And if not, maybe taking a step back, referring them out until you build up your knowledge base and your skill set to really be able to counsel people appropriately. So
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to echo that.
And I would always say, reaching out. I'm licensed myself in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, but I am always happy. I am part of a couple of networks. One is the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys. The other is the Family Law Institute of the LGBTQ plus Bar Association. And those organizations have attorneys both, across the country and internationally. We're connected with attorneys in other countries as well. And so I can always find my way to the right person. And I'm always happy to, be a starting point, to make sure that people get the right help. Because it's really important. I cannot tell you how many attorneys might tell someone, oh, well, you're on the birth certificate, that's it. If you call your local, divorce attorney, they're not going to be educated on this. And so it's really important to be able to direct people to professionals who are educated. I know a lot of my, other attorneys who are in those organizations, they want to make sure that people get to the right people as well. And so definitely reaching out.
Mhm. And I think that's definitely helping our providers like understand a little bit more what they can do to assist in this process. And to maybe like deepen our understanding, I want to break down a few of these pathways towards parenthood and kind of take like a little bit of a deeper dive. So we've started with the conversation about like medically assisted reproductive technologies. So let's say a family unit decides that's the direction they want to go. All three of you, what are your ideas on how does that pathway begin? And what are kind of the like the down and dirty version of what that journey might look like for them?
So I can start. It's a little hard when we say family because it can encompass so many different things. So I always start with, who intends to carry? Is there one person, if we're talking about two people, is there one person out of this couple who intends to carry? If not, then we're going down the surrogacy route. And then we're talking about how do we find a surrogate? How do we find funds to help you pay for a surrogate? If one of the couple intends to carry, then we have to evaluate that individual, and is it safe for them to carry, and do they have the right hormone environment and structure to carry a pregnancy safely. And so a lot of times it's about doing testing. If say we have two biological females, are we doing the right testing, right? So whose ovarian reserve marker supports the pregnancy the best out of the couple? What is the age of the both individuals? And is it appropriate for maybe the one with a better reserve to move forward as to someone with a lower reserve? So we start talking about a lot of conversations about, financial resources, ovarian reserve testing for biological women assigned female at birth versus looking at sperm counts. Is the sperm count appropriate? Is it not appropriate, to do an insemination? Do we have to do IVF to build the family? So a lot of it starts with just basic testing and then family goals in terms of carrying the pregnancy, and also the goals of how many children. Are we talking about two or three, or is the goal happy with one, child? And so that changes the conversation too. So I always say the first consultation is kind of going over goals, going over testing results, having honest conversations with each other if it's a couple, in terms of what you're both individually willing to do or not willing to do. Sometimes that conversation can be hard to say, like, maybe I'm not the best one to provide a biological specimen to help build our family. And so those are conversations that are ongoing. And that's why mental health support is really important, and counseling is really important, because this is a very complex journey. Sometimes we have one attempt in terms of finances to do things. And so having that mental health support to kind of navigate that, because it's a tough conversation to have, and having a solid, relationship between both individuals, a solid uh, open conversations about kind of what you both want as a couple. So it often is built over multiple sessions. It's not really achieved in just one consultation. It's a little bit of a journey just to get to where we're going to start treatment.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in there too and maybe take it even a step before what all
Mhm.
Dr. Thomas was suggesting. And I think what can be challenging for couples is just like knowing where to start. Provider choice, like who do you even go to? A lot of times people have already seen an OBGYN, and that's who they've gone for their annual PAPs. And they're like, well, I'll just ask them about it. And just because they do normal gyne care doesn't mean that they actually are skilled in fertility care or even know anything about it, especially for LGBTQ folks. So that isn't always the best place to start, unfortunately. And so I usually encourage people to start doing some Googling, reach out to some of the LGBTQ organizations, try to connect with other queer couples to see who they've found and who they've used. A little bit like what Becca was saying, like you can go to any old divorce attorney or family law attorney, but they don't really know, the gay experience. And they may not give the best advice. So the same sort of thing around healthcare professionals that do fertility care or gyne care. And so just like encouraging them to take a step back, reach out to queer organizations, trying to find other gay families, and just seeing sort of who they can use. And many queer folks don't actually have a fertility problem. When assessed, they're very healthy. They have a normal reproductive tract and they just have a sperm delivery issue. And so I always encourage people to try to look out for midwives like myself. There's there's a whole network of certified professional midwives and certified nurse midwives around the country that are also LGBTQ identified, that do base level fertility assessments and guidance and help navigate through the process and just help them with some basic insemination. And so I usually encourage people to look for that kind of first and foremost. And then if they're actually having fertility issues, to explore other options. In their local community. And not every community is, lucky enough to have, prominent gay organizations or, fertility specialists that focus on LGBTQ, but many do. And so it's just a matter of like doing a little digging and research and connecting with other queer families out there. And then the other like big question that a lot of people have is around donor and where do you get the swimmers from? Many folks in my community, buy sperm. They buy it from a cryobank. And there's lots of them out there. There's a lot of ethical issues with cryobanks these days. There's a lot of evolving ethics around open access ID donors. And so certainly that's a touch point for providers and therapists to do more research in, because we really are missing opportunities to help people navigate these complex issues of, where do you get the other genetic half of the kiddo from? Um, and we also have a lot of families formed in my state with known donors, and that opens up kind of some legal can of worms. My state has made some big changes around the laws around known donors, and we've had a few testing court cases around that, but that's not the case in all states. So just like understanding the other genetic half and where people are getting that and helping to guide and advise people based on your specific region.
Yeah, that was a good segue. Oh,
Yeah, go for it. Take it away, Becca.
good, a good segue to me because the legal perspective is never too early to have a consultation to know what legal services you might need. Certainly, the conversation that you have if you're considering private adoption versus using a known sperm donor or egg donor is going to be a very different conversation. But when you sort of have an idea what path you're going down, knowing what legal considerations you need to be aware of. If you're using a donor, any type of donor, whether it's egg, embryo, or sperm, there needs to be a legal contract on the front end. If you're working with a fertility clinic or other medical professional, that's something that they're going to want. I actually have to send letters to fertility clinics to let them know that there are agreements on file. But of course, there are not always medical professionals involved in at-home insemination. And so that's something to really be educated on. The laws of different states are even different regarding from New Jersey where I practice, there is a statute that requires to fall under their donor insemination statute, there needs to be a medical professional involved. And so really knowing that from the outset is really important. If you're using a surrogate, certainly there's a very extensive contract on the front end. And then once a child's born in each or prior to their being born, if it's a depending on where you live, you're going to need some sort of judicial order to confirm parentage if both people are not genetically related to the child. So for surrogacy, in most states, it's a pre-birth order, although not all. Some states has post-birth order process. If you're using donor gametes, chances, you're going to want to do some sort of confirmatory adoption to make sure you have an order. And, exactly what you need can vary from state to state. Some states have voluntary acknowledgements of parentage, which is a really great low cost tool to establish parentage, but not every state has that. So knowing what your state has and what you need to do to have the level of protection for your family that is the highest or the right for you. Mm-hmm. And then also, I saw a question in the chat about polyamorous families, and so I would say if there's more than two intended parents, really having that conversation on the front end. There are a few states like California where they actually have a statute that will allow for more than two parents in some limited circumstances, but that's definitely the very few number of states. There are some ways that we can get creative. in establishing a third parent or someone who has standing, at least in respect to custody. And so definitely, really, if it, that's definitely more unique. And so it's really important to have those conversations early.
And I want to open now one of the other pathways we discussed and looking at the adoption, foster, understanding from what you've spoken earlier, they have their own idiosyncrasies, but kind of looking down that pathway for our community. And Rebecca, I'm actually going to come back to you to start this one if you're okay with that.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
So really looking at now the adoption and or foster pathway as a way for LGBT families to bring kids into their lives.
Yeah, so that's definitely, I think interviewing agencies at the very beginning is, assuming that there is an agency, whether that's a foster care agency or a private agency, some people connect without an agency and that can work as well. But it's, but really interviewing the agency and making sure that it's a good fit and that they understand your family. Certainly there are also some agencies, that there's still discriminatory laws. There are some agencies that will not work with queer families, but also even the ones that are very friendly and well-meaning, how are they presenting a family profile? If a birth parent is saying, I only want to see, opposite sex families, are they including, trans profile, profiles where one parent is trans in those opposite sex family profiles? What is their understanding of the families and the family's needs? So I think really that's really important to find an agency that is a really good fit. And then also, I think Janine had talked about that for foster care, the goal of foster care is reunification. And so if that's a path that you're exploring, it can certainly be a pathway to parentage, but you also need to understand that that's not the purpose of foster care. And it could very well be a temporary, placement. And so really understanding the different option and what you can, what feels good and right for your family.
And I think just to add to that, really kind of going back to the idea of getting in social networks and online communities that can help you find those agencies that are inclusive and supportive, that don't lead to long delays in adoption and foster care. So really making sure that, as individuals, you're going out and really networking fortunately online, there's just so many resources out there that can help you find the agencies that are more inclusive, that can help you get those pathways, and you don't feel the discrimination that a lot of individuals are feeling when they're trying to pursue family planning through adoption or foster care.
Janine, anything you would add?
Nope, I think they covered most everything. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then we kind of under the medical brought in the idea of surrogacy, but for me, when I hear it, it sounds like its own very distinctive path. And so I want to lay out what would the path in surrogacy towards parenthood look like for an LGBTQ family?
So I can speak to, Rebecca can speak more on the legal side, but from the medical side, there's first the idea of creating the embryo, so the IVF process, which is a whole entire separate process, but going through that whole process to create the embryos, feeling comfortable with the embryos that you have before moving forward with the surrogacy option. And then surrogacy, there's a couple ways. Sometimes people work with agencies, which is a very common way, but there are private surrogacy options as well. If you have a family member, somebody who is willing to care for you. And that's done through legal assistance as well. But agencies can kind of help walk you through that process of matching. But it's really about working with a fertility clinic and an agency that helps you match with a potential surrogate, going through their medical history, their pregnancy history, making sure they're safe for surrogacy, that aren't any kind of red flags or medical red flags that would make them at risk or your child at risk during that pregnancy. And then just making sure that they will have a high success rate because the goal ultimately is a successful pregnancy after an embryo transfer. So really working with a clinic that has experience with third-party reproduction with surrogacy, has great protocols, good follow-through, and good transition in care and communication. It's about communication with the intended parents and then transitioning care to a general OBGYN or a midwifery provider who can kind of carry on that pregnancy and give you great feedback throughout the pregnancy so that you feel included in the process as well. And so a lot of it is about finding those resources online of people who are experienced in surrogacy, who can walk you through the process and provide you with a good, the successful good outcome where you feel like you're truly a part of the process and you have a safe outcome from a legal perspective and from the health of the baby as well.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I would
for,
just add, oh,
go
sorry. I
ahead.
was just going to add just real briefly too. Sometimes LGBTQ families have a personal connection to like one piece of it, right? They have somebody who wants to donate their egg, or they have somebody who's willing to be the actual surrogate, but they need to source the egg. And so it's a little along the line of like the known donor when you need, the swimmers part of it. But so that's also something to like counsel them through, that's a little different than everything being kind of anonymous and going through an agency. And it can be a wonderful piece of it, but for those of us who are counseling people, you need to, there's some added factors that go along with that, both legally but also ethically too. Yeah. So that's all I was going to say, and then I'm sure Becca has a
Okay.
lot of
Yeah.
legal things to say about that.
Yes, so certainly as one, yes, you need to make your embryos. And so wherever that, egg source is coming from, you may need a contract if there is a known donor or a directed anonymous donor. Oftentimes there's contracts and it can really sort of depend exactly how, whether the eggs are already with the clinic and the rights have been taken care of there, or if there's a direct contract. But then once you have your embryos and you're ready to have a gestational carrier, there's a very comprehensive contract. And this is true whether it's your best friend or sister carrying the pregnancy, or whether it is someone you met on Facebook in a matching group, or whether it's someone through an agency. And so the contracts are, I've seen them anywhere from like 25 to 70 pages of everything you could imagine to make sure that everyone is on the same page going into this. And it really is, these contracts are legally enforceable. However, in many aspects, you can't get specific performance, meaning that you cannot make a pregnant person undergo a medical procedure. And so a lot of the remedies that we have legally are not going to fix a situation where people are in disagreement about whether there should be a certain medical test. So a lot of the work on the front end is really aligning expectations. And the contract goes through, certainly it covers who is a parent under the law, but it goes through lifestyle restrictions. So every agreement's going to say, don't drink alcohol while you're pregnant. It might say, limit caffeine, but some agreements are going to say, when everyone's aligned, well, we would really like for you to consume only organic food. And so it really gets detailed. It makes sure that people are aligned on, in what circumstances might there be selective reduction or a termination. It's going to talk about confidentiality. Is this something that you can like post all over social media, or is this something that's going to be more private? And so it covers worst case scenarios that we hope never happen. What if something happened to the intended parents while the gestational carrier is pregnant? And I'm sure Dr. Thomas might talk about also I think a lot of couples, especially where both people who are intended parents have sperm, sometimes have an idea, well, why don't we just do a double embryo transfer and we'll get it over with? And I know there's a lot of medical risk associated with that, which is not what I do, but I certainly have seen the results and know that there's a lot of complications that can come with that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great topic because, we see it and the majority of patients. A lot of patients come in and they really would rather, what we say, one and done, and essentially have one pregnancy and have what we call multiple gestation. And it's high risk for the surrogates, right? So, my job as a physician is to not only care about the health of your baby, but also the surrogate as well, and make sure that they're safe and that they have a good, healthy outcome, because what they're doing is a wonderful service for all of us. And we're very grateful that they take on this role, but we want to make sure that their pregnancy is safe for them. They have families to go back to after the end of this pregnancy. We want to make sure that they are okay. And multiple gestation, so twins or higher, is actually high risk for mom, high risk for baby. And so we really try to discourage that because of those risks. We also can't control splitting. And so I really want to encourage people to remember that embryos can split. So we can put two in, and we can't control whether they're going to become triplets or higher. And so that is one of the fear that as physicians that we get concerned about is, is there going to be a split, and then how that may impact your pregnancy or the surrogate's health. And so that is something that we do discourage. Unfortunately, I know a lot of people would like twins, but and we used to have a high amount of twins and triplets in IVF, but we have a lot more regulation now and a lot more protocols and national guidelines that we follow prior to performing an embryo transfer.
And so we've followed some of the major paths that families might take to create their families. But I think you've all kind of hinted around this, and I'm the person who'll just put it out there and ask the direct question. This is a huge financial, investment. And if we were going to talk basic numbers, would you throw some out there? And what do you know about resources that can help people who may not have access to that kind of income or money?
So,
Right.
oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead first.
Oh, so just thinking, for something like assuming you're not doing an at-home insemination, but if it's an at-home insemination, the procedure itself is without cost. But you do have to pay for sperm, and that can be as low as 800,000 to up to a couple thousand for a vial of sperm, depending on the bank and different demographics that you're looking for. And if you're doing an insemination at a clinic, it can range from 1,500 up to 3,000, depending on how much hormones you need. And that does not include the sperm. So it can get pretty costly just for an insemination cycle. And you have to kind of think about how many cycles you may need to achieve a pregnancy using that route. IVF can range anywhere from 12 to 15,000 up to 25, 30,000, depending on your state, depending on how much medications you need, genetic testing of the embryos, how many embryos you're testing, the procedure, anesthesia, all of that comes into the cost of IVF. So IVF can be pretty costly. And if you do choose to use a surrogate or need a surrogate or gestational carrier, that can range from 60 up to, six figures, 100, 150,000 for a surrogate. Using an agency. So it can be pretty costly, thinking of all the different steps, especially if you started at an IUI and wound up needing IVF and then ultimately needed a surrogacy. This is things that, what we call medical bankruptcy. Sometimes people have lost a lot of money through this path trying to achieve a pregnancy. So it could be pretty difficult to use ART to build your family.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
I see it. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
There's a lot of socioeconomic disparity as well.
Mhm.
People, the cheaper options to have a family is, okay, let's use a known donor with at-home insemination,
Mhm.
or, we are a couple who might, know someone who's willing to be our traditional surrogate. But there's so what is, avoiding a lot of medical costs has a really higher legal risk. There are certainly contracts that can be put in place to cover some of those scenarios, not traditional surrogacy, but well, depending on where you are, not traditional surrogacy. But really, if you're going with one of those options where you're not using a medical professional, to make sure you have the legal protections, they become even more important at that point, I would say. I mean, they're always important, but there's a lot more legal risk for some of scenarios. Legally, I would say a lot of attorneys who do assisted reproduction work across the country charge on flat fees. So you might see, for each of these contracts, best practice is for there to be an attorney representing the intended parents and an attorney representing the donor and or gestational carrier. So you're going to see legal fees on both sides. Usually the intended parents pay for all of the legal fees, not just their attorney, but the gestational carrier attorney as well. I would say for surrogacy, you're probably seeing, maybe under 6,000 on the contract between all of the attorneys. And then for pre-birth order, the procedure is different in different states. But I would say, it should be, usually it's under, 3,000, certainly under 4,000 for surrogacy. For confirmatory adoption, that's going to vary tremendously by what the state requirements are. In some states, there's more involved where you have to do clearances and things like that. Other states, it's just submitting paperwork. But I would say in most states, it should still be under $4,000 if it's a flat fee. And I'm talking about confirmatory adoption. Private adoption can be, depending on the circumstances, can certainly be straightforward. But if it's not straightforward, it can be very expensive.
Yeah, so I have a few things to add. How are people finding resources, right? Because you've heard all these high costs, right? Even just doing a bare minimum, right? You have a known donor, you're gonna squirt sperm up there yourself, right? You still need to pay an attorney to draw up a known donor agreement. So there's sort of some base level costs, right? And the more financially strapped people are, the more desperate and unsafe decisions that they make. There's a whole community online, and it breaks my heart when I see it, but of donors, LGBTQ folks trying to find donors, and they just meet up in some parking lot and exchange gametes. And that's dangerous. It's dangerous medically, it's dangerous legally. And we should be discouraging people from doing that, but we shouldn't be just discouraging them from doing that without having other resources to send them to. So we're finding more and more over time that insurance is paying for more services. When I started doing this 15 years ago, I would be like, your insurance isn't going to cover anything. It's not going to even cover me to do a lab draw to test anything, right? Now, many people have IUIs covered. They get some of the care covered with their surrogate through their insurance, a wide variety of things. So people should always be checking their insurance. Some people are even switching jobs or taking on part-time jobs that offer insurance that covers fertility-based care. So families can get creative. I know Starbucks was one. You could sort of work a bare minimum at Starbucks and get insurance that had fertility coverage. But more and more I'm seeing coverage, including all the way up to things like IVF, which has not been heard of before. And then I see a fair amount of people doing travel. They're traveling to cheaper states. They're traveling to different areas. We've got some, pretty reputable reproductive endocrinology clinics that people travel to within the United States, but also outside the United States. And so obviously there's risk to doing that. So kind of buyer beware, but that is definitely something that people can do. They can shop around and go elsewhere. And then I hear of periodically things like kind of scholarships that people can apply for through places like Family Equality Council. I don't know a lot of people that have actually gotten some, financial resources to defray their adoption costs or their surrogacy costs, but I hear periodically of them out there. So people should definitely Google. And then some people's employers have scholarships for things like adoption. It's usually not a huge amount of money, but sometimes through your employer, you can get some sort of little grant or something. So that's definitely something, if you work for a corporation, people should check out and just see what the resources are that are out there. And I wish we had more community-based resources around finances around this. And I would love to hear it if other people have other resources to send people to, because some people are really being priced out of family building these days.
And as we're coming to a close today, your I wish statement actually brings me into our last question. And we bring this up in every conversation that we have. Looking at the state of, LGBTQ family building right now, what is your wish or hope for the future, where you see us heading, where your ultimate place would be in people trying to pursue building these families in the LGBTQ community?
I could start with just access. So access to inclusive, knowledgeable fertility clinics to help with ART if that's the path that you need. And I think, having more clinics be more knowledgeable, more inclusive in their language, more diverse staff, and more knowledgeable about grant scholarships. There's medication discount programs as well through some of the pharmacies. So having clinics that can provide that information and walk more individuals through third-party reproduction. So matching you with sperm donors, egg donors, and surrogates.
Yeah, my wish would just be for a safe world for these families to grow and thrive, and it to be no big deal for family formation for our families, or just as little of a big deal as it is for all families to be formed, and just love and acceptance at all levels in the family building journey and beyond.
Yeah. I guess my wish or vision would be that, all LGBTQ plus parents or people who want to be parents, that can be accessible. I think in speaking to LGBTQ plus people of different generations, I think, some people, said, well, when I came out, my family was so upset, or I never, thought that I would have children, and they oftentimes didn't vision that for themselves. And so I would love to see, the generation, that's growing up now, really, if they're coming out, that's not even a question, that they see so many diverse families, and they know that whatever their sexual orientation is or gender identity is, that they can be a parent.
Wow. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy schedules. It's been such an honor to sit with you in this space today and learn from all of your incredible, incredible lived experience. And I want to thank all of you who joined us live today, and those of you joining us to listen to it later. If you want to share this with other people, it will be posted in the next few days. You can find that on OutCare Health. And join us again in November, on November 13th, this same time frame, 3 o'clock West Coast, 6 o'clock East Coast. And I did not think of the humor and irony of what the next subject is until I was about to announce it, but here you go. Our next conversation about inclusive sexual health education, addressing the needs of LGBTQ teens. A lot of times for adolescents in sexual education, we're overlooking the ideas of connecting into sexual orientation and gender identity in that process. We're going to really look at, with experts in the field, as the way that we can help affirm the sexual health of LGBTQ adolescents as they come into maturity. So once again, thank you all so much for joining us today. Have a beautiful rest of your day. And I hope every one of your visions for the future comes true.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you so much. It's
everybody.
been a pleasure.
Absolutely.